The year was 1865, and the prairie carried a silence that bit deeper than the cold. Snow lay heavy across the plains, unbroken save for a single trail of hoofprints winding toward the foothills. The rider hunched low in the saddle looked more like a shadow than a man, his duster stiff with frost, his hat brim sagging beneath icicles. His name was Elias Rourke, though few remembered it anymore. He had once owned 300 head of cattle, a wife with a smile brighter than the Colorado sun, and neighbors who tipped their hats when he passed. That was 10 years gone, a failed harvest, a banknote called too soon, and a fever that took his wife left with nothing but land too dry for crops and a name that meant little in town. Folks spoke of him only when they wanted to point at ruin and say, "That's what happens when fortune turns her back." Now Elias lived alone, his ranch nothing but a sagging barn, a weather-warped house, and a few skeletal cows that looked as forgotten as their master. He carried on in silence, working the land because there was nothing else to do. The snowstorm that evening pressed hard against him. His horse's breath puffed white in the fading light, and Elias tightened the wool around his neck. That was when he heard it. Thin, shrill, cutting to the moan of the wind. A scream. He pulled up on the reins, listening. Another cry followed, raw with terror. The kind of sound that had no place in an empty wilderness. Elias's hand went instinctively to the Winchester lashed to his saddle. He nudged the horse forward, ears sharp, eyes narrowing against the driving snow. Then came the sound no man mistakes, the guttural growl of wolves. The scene appeared suddenly as he crested a rise. Down below, where the snowdrifts cut into a gully, a small figure struggled against a half-circle of wolves. Their yellow eyes gleamed, their muzzles frosted with hunger. The girl, he could see now it was a girl, maybe 12 or 13, clutched a stick in shaking hands, swinging it wildly as the beast crept closer. Elias spurred his horse without thinking. The animal slid down the slope, snow spraying up around his hooves. He yanked the Winchester free, cocked it, and fired. The report cracked like thunder, echoing off the bare hills. One wolf yelped and dropped, blood darkening the snow. The rest turned, startled, their growls rising to a furious pitch. The horse screamed as one lunged, snapping at its leg. Elias swung the rifle down like a club, smashing the beast across the muzzle. Another came from behind. He barely had time to shoulder the rifle and fire again. Short, brutal, close. The girl screamed, stumbled, went down beneath a wolf that clamped its jaws on her arm. Elias bellowed and hurled himself from the saddle. He hit the snow hard, rolled, came up with his hunting knife. His boots pounded across the frozen ground, his breath ragged in the icy air. He slammed into the wolf, driving the blade deep into its side. Hot blood spurted against his hands, steaming in the cold. The animal thrashed, teeth snapping inches from his face, then went still. The rest of the pack hesitated, hackles raised. Elias growled low, chest heaving, knife red in his fist. Then he roared and charged, swinging the bloody steel. The wolves broke, scattering into the storm, their howls trailing off into the night. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged sobbing of the girl. She knelt in the snow, her arm torn, her dark hair tangled across her face. The blood that trickled from her wound looked shockingly bright against her brown skin. She flinched as Elias came near, eyes wide with mistrust. "Easy," he said, voice rough as gravel. "I won't hurt you." But his words didn't bridge the gulf between them. He could see it clear, the shape of her dress, the beads at her neck. She was Apache, and to her, he was nothing but another white rancher with a rifle in his hands. The girl sagged in the snow, shivering. The wound on her arm bled freely, staining the sleeve of her deerskin dress. Elias looked at it, then at her wary eyes. "You'll freeze out here," he muttered. "Come on." He knelt, slid an arm beneath her shoulders, and lifted her with surprising gentleness. She struggled at first, weak fists pushing against him, but he held firm. "You fight, you die. That's the truth of it," he said. She stilled then, eyes filled with both terror and the smallest flicker of reluctant trust. The ride back to his ranch was slow, the girl trembling against him, the snow falling harder with each mile. Elias felt the weight of her slight frame, and for the first time in years, he felt something stirring in his chest that wasn't emptiness. Inside his cabin, the fire sputtered weakly until he coaxed it alive with fresh wood. He laid the girl on his bed, stripped the torn sleeve, and washed the wound with whiskey. She cried out once, biting her lip, but didn't move away. Her courage struck him, fierce for one so young. "Name?" he asked quietly, dabbing the wound with a rag. She looked at him, silent, eyes full of suspicion. Finally, in halting English, she whispered, "Nita?" He nodded. "Nita, I'm Elias." For days she lingered there, recovering. She spoke little, watching him with wary eyes as he cooked beans, chopped wood, tended to chores. Slowly, she began to respond. She taught him words in her language, simple things: fire, water, wolf. He taught her how to mend a fence rail. One evening, she sat by the fire, staring into flames. Her eyes were old for her years, carrying shadows of things Elias would never know. "Why help?" she asked suddenly. He paused. The question cut deep. He thought of his wife's smile, of the neighbors who'd once trusted him, of the life he'd squandered. His voice was low when he answered. "Because someone should." The words hung between them, truer than he expected. But trust was a fragile thing, and the wilderness did not allow bonds to hold for long. One morning, when the snow had melted the slush in the sky, carried the first whisper of spring, Elias awoke to find her gone. No footprints lingered in the mud. She had left before dawn, swift and silent, back to her people. He stood in the doorway, staring at the empty trail, the wind rattling the loose shutters of the cabin. The bed where she had slept was cold, the blanket folded neatly as if to erase her presence. He felt the emptiness crash over him, sharper than before. Elias Rourke, forgotten rancher, was alone again. But as he turned back inside, the faintest trace of her voice echoed in his memory. Her laughter when she had learned to say horse in his tongue, the way her eyes softened when she spoke of wolves. He told himself he would never see her again, that she belonged to her people, and he to his loneliness. But deep down, in a place he refused to admit even to himself, Elias knew the frontier was not done with them. The land had its own way of keeping debts, and one day it would come to collect. By 1875, Elias Rourke was no longer the man who had cut through a pack of wolves to save a child. 10 winters had weathered him harder than the storms ever could. His beard was white at the edges, his shoulders stooped, and his ranch had shriveled to nearly nothing. The barn leaned like a drunk against the wind, and the house sagged as though ready to fall into the dust. In town, they called him the ghost rancher. Not cruelly, not kindly either, just a fact, like noting a tree that had long since died but still stood. Elias rarely went there, except when his stores ran too low. And that spring, with his last sack of beans scraped clean and his flour barrel empty, he saddled his tired horse and rode into town. But the town he rode into was not the same one he remembered. Men on the porch of the saloon spoke in low voices, glancing toward the horizon. Women kept their children close. A name floated through the air like smoke. A young Apache chief, a woman, fierce as the desert sun. They said she led raids against ranches, against supply trains, against the cavalry itself. They said she was ruthless, clever, and unyielding. Elias listened, silent, as he bought flour and coffee. The whispers continued, words carrying just loud enough. She don't fight like the rest. She thinks. Plans. Like a man, but sharper. Another voice chimed. Hell, sharper than any man I ever met. Her name's Nita. The sack of flour slipped in Elias's hands. He caught it before it fell, but his chest tightened. Nita. He hadn't spoken that name in a decade, but it had lived in him all those years, like an ember under ash. He saw her again as she had been, thin and trembling by the fire, eyes too old for her years. He'd thought her gone forever, swallowed by her people and by time. Yet now the whole territory spoke her name with fear and awe. That evening, as he rode back through the outskirts, the sun bled red across the hills. His horse grew restless, ears flicking, nostrils flaring. Elias slowed, hand brushing the butt of his revolver. A shadow slipped across the ridge. Then another, and another. By the time he realized, They had surrounded him. Apache riders, silent as a desert wind, bows and rifles gleaming in the last light. Elias raised his hand slowly, the sack of flour tumbling into the dust. A warrior barked something in their tongue. The others tightened the circle. Elias's heart thumped slow, steady. He'd been ready for death for years, but not like this. Not dragged off by warriors whose leader might be the very girl he once saved. A woman rode forward from the ridge, tall in the saddle, wrapped in buckskin trimmed with beads that shimmered in the dying sun, her hair bound with eagle feathers. Her gaze was sharp, unflinching, and on her forearm, half hidden by leather bindings, Elias saw the scar, a deep crescent left by a wolf's teeth. His breath caught. She looked at him as though she knew him, yet owed him nothing. "You are Elias Rourke," she said in English, her voice carrying the weight of command. "You saved me once. Now you stand on land that bleeds my people." They bound his hands and took him to their camp. Firelight flickered across painted faces, horses tethered close, children darting between shadows. Elias had not been this close to Apache in years, and the memory of stories, of raids, of scalps, of cruelty pressed in on him. Yet what he saw was not savagery. It was survival. Men sharpening arrows, women tending fires, old ones whispering prayers to the stars. Nita stood apart, speaking with her warriors. Every movement she made carried authority, as though the fire bent itself toward her. Elias sat on the ground, wrists raw from the rope, and studied her. The girl was gone. In her place was someone carved by hardship, by battle, by loss. But the eyes were the same, dark, fierce, remembering. She came to him at last. "The settlers call me thief, murderer. They say I burn homes and take cattle. Do you believe them?" Elias met her gaze. "Doesn't matter what I believe. I only know the girl I pulled from the snow." Her jaw tightened. "That girl is dead." He saw the truth in her, though, saw the shadow of that frightened child still flickering beneath the chief's mask. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but she left a mark, right here." He tapped his chest. The silence stretched. Finally, she spoke. "Why are you alone, Elias Rourke? You were once a man with land, with people. Now you are nothing." Her words cut, though she meant them not as cruelty but as fact. He swallowed hard. "Life took more than I could hold. Left me empty." Nita's eyes softened for the briefest flicker. Then she straightened. "Empty men are dangerous. They have nothing to lose." Before Elias could answer, a gunshot cracked the night. Then another. Chaos erupted at the edge of camp. Shadows moved fast, rifles flaring. Bandits, not cavalry. Settler outlaws, likely drawn by the chance to strike Apache and take horses. Nita barked orders, her voice a whip. Warriors sprang to arms. Elias ducked low as bullets hissed through the camp. One struck the ground inches from his boot. His hands were still bound, but instinct took over. He lunged toward a fallen warrior, grabbed the knife at his belt, and sawed the rope loose. The bandits charged through the smoke, faces twisted with greed and hate. Elias snatched the rifle from the ground. He fired once, twice. Bandits dropped. The camp roared with battle cries, arrows streaking, flames kicking sparks into the night sky. Through the storm of noise, he saw Nita in the thick of it, fighting with a knife in one hand and a revolver in the other. She moved like fire, relentless, precise. A bandit lunged in the smoke, pistol raised at her back. Elias didn't think. He fired. The man crumpled at her feet. She turned, eyes locking with his across the chaos. For an instant, they weren't Apache chief and forgotten rancher. They were two souls bound by survival, as they had been a decade ago against the wolves. The bandits broke before dawn, leaving bodies and smoke behind. The camp lay bloodied but unbroken. Nita stood amid the wreckage, chest heaving, hair loose from its bindings. She looked at Elias across the dying fire, her voice low but steady. "You fight like a man with something to protect." He wiped blood from his cheek, his rifle heavy in his hands. "Maybe I found something worth it again." The night stretched long after the battle. Warriors carried their wounded. Women tended to children, and the camp settled into weary silence. Nita sat apart by the fire, her shadow tall against the rocks. Elias found himself drawn there, his boots crunching softly in the dirt. She didn't look at him when she spoke. "When you saved me, I thought you were a god, a man who had no fear. But now I see you are only a man, a broken one." Elias lowered himself beside her, the fire crackling between them. "I was afraid that night," he admitted. "I'm afraid most nights. But I couldn't let you die." Her eyes flicked to him, sharp and searching. "Why?" He thought of his wife again, of the grave he dug with shaking hands, of the silence that had swallowed him since. "Because once someone saved me. Long ago, I figured maybe I owed the world the same." For the first time, her expression cracked. A flicker of pain crossed her face, quickly masked. "I never forgot you," she whispered, "even when they mocked me for the scar. Even when they said no man would want me. I remember the man who carried me through snow and fire." Elias's throat tightened. He stared into the flames. "I thought I'd never matter to anyone again." Her hand brushed the scar on her arm, then rested lightly against her chest. "You mattered more than you know." The fire snapped, sparks spiraling into the dark. For a long time, neither spoke. Then she rose, tall and strong, her voice once more that of a chief. "But tomorrow we are enemies again. My people fight to live. Yours fight to keep us from living. Do not forget that." He stood too, slower, the years heavy on him. His eyes met hers, steady. "I'll remember, but I'll also remember this fire. And that's something no war can burn away." They faced each other in silence, the flames between them like a fragile truce. Neither yielded, neither turned away. When dawn crept over the horizon, Elias Rourke knew two things with absolute certainty. The Apache chief Nita was no longer the girl he'd saved, and yet she was still bound him in ways neither time nor blood, nor war could sever. The desert wind carried more than dust that week. It carried whispers of war. Word came on the lips of a wounded scout, crawling half-dead into the trading post. A band of outlaws, armed and merciless, were moving through the territory, hired quiet by a crooked cavalry officer to do the killing his uniform forbade. Their purpose was simple: wipe out Nita's people, scatter them to bones and ashes, and call it peace. Elias Rourke heard it first in town, his hands tightening around a tin mug of bitter coffee as the scout's story spilled. The townsfolk muttered relief. It meant fewer raids, fewer cattle gone missing. But Elias felt only a cold knot settling in his gut. He knew what this was. Murder dressed up as order. That night, he saddled his horse and rode not toward home but toward the Apache lands. His breath fogged against the chill, his joints stiff in the saddle. But his mind was clear. He had lived 10 years as a forgotten man. This was his chance to matter once more. He found Nita's people camped in a valley where cottonwoods leaned against a restless stream. The camp was restless too, warriors sharpening knives, women gathering what little they could carry, children's eyes wide with fear. They had heard the whispers too. When Elias rode in, rifles snapped up, only Nita's voice cut through. "Hold." She strode from the shadows, her presence steady as the earth beneath them. Her eyes searched him, measuring his intent. "Why are you here, rancher?" He dismounted slowly, boots sinking into the dust. "Because a storm's coming," he said. "And if you don't brace for it, you'll all be swept clean away." A ripple of unease moved through the gathered Apaches. Nita's gaze hardened. "You speak of outlaws." "I speak of killers," Elias corrected. "They're coming at dawn, with rifles and greed. They don't care about land or peace. They'll butcher your people because they were paid to." The elders gathered near, their weathered faces etched with suspicion. One spoke sharply in Apache, his tone dripping with disdain. Nita translated. "They say we cannot trust a white man's tongue. Not even yours." Elias's jaw clenched. He faced the elder directly. "You don't have to trust my words. Trust the blood that's already been spilled. I've seen these men. They'll take your lives and your children's too. You got one chance. Stand and fight or run and die tired." The camp bristled with low murmurs. Nita raised her hand, silencing them. Her eyes locked with Elias's, searching. At last, she nodded. "If he speaks true, we cannot run. We meet the storm. The decision struck like a drumbeat. The camp moved with sudden purpose. Women packing bundles, warriors stringing bows, rifles checked and reloaded. Elias stood among them, feeling the weight of eyes on him. Some saw him as an ally, others as a fool. But Nita's trust, that alone bound him there. Night fell thick. Fires burned low. Elias sat by one, cleaning his revolver, when Nita joined him. She crouched close, her shadow flickering against the flames. "Why risk this?" she asked softly. "You owe us nothing." Elias's eyes stayed on the gun in his hands. "Because I've spent too long being nothing. If this is how I go, at least I'll go standing for something." For a long while, she said nothing. Then her hand brushed his, light as a whisper. "If we survive this, Elias Rourke, you will not be nothing to me." The words rooted deep, stronger than any promise. He nodded once, and together they sat in silence, listening to the river murmur as the dawn of blood crept closer. The first shots came with the sunrise. They cracked across the valley like lightning splitting stone. Men shouted, horses screamed, and the air filled with dust and death. Elias was on his feet in an instant, revolver drawn, his heart thundering in his chest. Nita's warriors answered with cries that tore the sky. The battle had begun. The outlaws came in waves, faces twisted with hunger and hate, rifles blazing. The air filled with acrid smoke, the stench of gunpowder and sweat. Elias fired, reloaded, fired again, his knuckles raw from the recoil. Every shot was a prayer, every breath a gift. He saw Nita in the fray, her knife flashing silver, her revolver bucking in her hand. She moved like a storm-given flesh. Every strike a vow to her people. Twice Elias saw death closing in on her, and twice he cut it down with his bullets, standing at her back as though the years had never passed. A horse screamed near the stream. A boy fell with an arrow in his chest, his cry cut short. Elias's gut clenched, rage flooding him. He charged, shoulder slamming into a bandit, both men crashing into the dust. The knife in Elias's hand found flesh, hot blood soaking his sleeve. He staggered up, breath ragged, vision tunneling. Still they came. More men, more guns. The ground was littered with the fallen, Apache and outlaw alike. The valley had become a furnace of death. Then Elias saw him. The leader of the outlaws, broad-shouldered, coat flapping open to reveal stolen medals pinned to his chest. His revolver roared, cutting down warrior after warrior. His eyes met Nita's, and his mouth twisted into a cruel grin. "No!" Elias roared. He ran through the smoke, boots pounding the ground, every muscle screaming. The outlaw raised his gun at Nita, finger tightening on the trigger. Elias threw himself between them. The shot cracked. Pain exploded through his side, hot and blinding. He stumbled but kept moving, knife flashing upward, burying itself beneath the outlaw's ribs. The man gasped, eyes wide with shock, then collapsed into the dust. Elias staggered, blood soaking his shirt. His knees buckled, but Nita's hands caught him before he fell. Her face hovered above his, fierce and stricken, her breath ragged. "Fool!" she whispered, voice breaking. "Why would you do this?" He tried to smile, though his lips tasted of iron. "Because someone should." The battle raged around them, but Nita would not let go. She shouted commands, warriors rallying, driving the last of the outlaws into retreat. The valley rang with their cries as the survivors fled, leaving their dead behind. Silence fell, broken only by the groans of the wounded. Smoke drifted upward, curling into the pale sky. The tribe had survived. Barely. Nita pressed her hand to Elias's wound, blood seeping hot between her fingers. "You will live," she said fiercely, as though daring him to deny her. He coughed, pain tearing through him. "Maybe, maybe not." His eyes met hers, steady, unflinching. "But whether I do or don't, you'll carry on, stronger than any chief before you." Tears shone in her eyes, though she blinked them away. "You saved me twice now. From wolves. From men. Tell me who will save you." His lips curved faintly. "You already did." For a long moment, they stayed like that, her hand pressed his wound, His eyes locked on hers. The world around them reduced to firelight and the thrum of their hearts. When the elders came, offering him a place among them, Elias shook his head weakly. "This is your world," he rasped. "I've got one left, an old ranch waiting to rot. That's where I'll end." Nita's jaw clenched, but she bowed her head in respect. "Then know this, Elias Rourke, you will never be forgotten. Not by me, not by my people." The sun rose higher, gilding the blood-stained valley in cruel light. Survivors gathered their dead. Children clung to their mothers. Warriors stood with shoulders heavy but unbroken. And at the center, a forgotten rancher bled into the dust. Held by the girl he had saved, now a chief who had saved him in turn. The narrator's voice lingered like wind through canyon walls. So, what do we take from this tale? That the frontier was never just land. It was a crucible, a place where men and women were tested, not by what they gained, but by what they gave away. Elias Rourke gave his blood, and in return, he found what every forgotten soul longs for, not memory, but meaning. He saved her from the wolves once. But in the end, it was she who saved him from being forgotten. And with that truth etched into the dust and blood of the frontier, the story left its mark, one that would echo long after the gunfire faded.